Hello, my name is Mandolin Royal, and today I have a heck of a comparison to make. So in the left-hand spot, we have one of the American Bresse and Chantecler hybrids. She weighs in at 4 pounds. Well, I forgot the ounces. Let me see. 6 ounces. In the middle slot, we have a pure American Bresse pullet. She weighs in at 4 pounds, 14 ounces. These guys are from the same hatch on the same day. They've been grown out together and they're now at 16 weeks old. I wish I had cockerels to do this comparison with, but I don't, so we're going to use girls instead because neither one of them, to me, came off as breeding quality. And so that means their future is either going to be breakfast eggs or freezer camp. And I have quite a few breakfast egg makers already. I have more coming up behind these. And since it was a small hatch, I really don't need these two. And we eat a lot of chicken. So I'm going to go the freezer route with both of these. And that's also going to be very educational from the standpoint of growth rate, when they grow, how they grow, as well as a carcass comparison between the two types. So to explain these a little bit further, our American Bresse flock, I have been guiding and selecting towards dual purpose traits. So I want to see them grow fast, grow meaty, and if they're female, I want to see them lay really, really well. Based on development, this one will probably be laying in the neighborhood of 19, 20 weeks old or so. And I've noticed with the hybrid, it might be more like 20, 22, 23 weeks. And that's because the sire, the Chantecler male, he's a late developing, more exhibition bred kind of bird. And it took the sire every bit of 8 months to fill in and actually gain his carcass. He was a tall, lanky boy there for a while. And the offspring from the hybrid mostly are doing that sort of growth. So my aim here in doing this hybrid is to develop a more winter hardy bird with the table traits of the American Bresse. And that's not going to be fast. I'm going to need, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 years to really see it through and capture everything great about the American Bresse, but with that winterized comb. If you look at her, there's absolutely nothing on her head to get frostbit, and that is a valuable trait in and of itself, much further north than we are, though we do get our fair share of some winter hardship on the birds. So structurally, these birds are very different. Even though when you look at them from here, they have similar height, sort of similar shape once we get in here. But when you get under the feathers and you start really nitpicking them, and especially when you get your hands on them, they feel a lot different. This one is definitely more of the slow to mature. And you can kind of see it in her facial coloring and how pink she still is, versus this one who's starting to gain some color as she develops towards laying age. So the biggest difference structurally is definitely in the undercarriage. Once we have feathers off, that'll be more readily apparent, and hopefully it's going to show what I've been talking about this entire time and really hone in on why it's important to get your hands on the birds to select for those better table traits. And I have not noticed a decline in laying by going a little bit meatier with the bird. I think if you develop tunnel vision and you chase meat for too long and you don't pay attention to the laying traits, you're going to lose the laying traits. If you dive deep into the laying traits and you ignore the meat aspect, you're going to lose out on the meat. So it's a delicate little balancing act to maintain both traits. And this one is probably going to be a really productive layer, but she doesn't quite have that feel that I look for in my breeding stock. So I wish I had another female that did have the meat quality so I can compare breast to breast and then breast to hybrid, as well as a purebred Chantecler of the more exhibition type that grows a lot slower to kind of show those differences. But I'm a little limited on the birds I have available because I'm not going to call myself out of a flock either. You got to be careful and not overdo the culling. Now, this breast pullet, she sorted out pretty early on as not ideal. And so she's just been growing out with these. I'm going to do an overhead handling of both of them so that we can talk about what they feel like and what their bone spacing is and see how they compare and contrast to each other. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the deed and pluck them out so we can get that visual of what they look like when the feathers are off. Because they only have an 8-ounce difference in weight. So where is their weight that they're carrying? Where are they similar and where are they different? And why does that matter? So I'm going to go ahead and get set up so we can dive into those details. Alright, so I have my handy little culling device that I use when it's only a bird or two. I don't use a knife. I go ahead and just break their neck with that. And then I put them into the cone to get through their little final stages. I have my stainless steel workstation all cleaned off. I have a couple of knives, cutting board, and some shrink bags for after the fact. And in hindsight, I should have picked a different backing board that was not so absorbent. Stainless steel, everything is definitely the way to go. But before I get started, let's go ahead and do the bird evaluations to see what they feel like so that then I can show you what they feel like. Alright, so first up we have the hybrid pullet at 16 weeks old. She is 8 ounces smaller than the American Bresse, but I can tell a lot by just her head. This bird will eventually fill out and get pretty wide and probably pretty fleshy. But at 16 weeks old, I'm expecting just a little bit more. I know it's possible. I've seen it. So the first step on evaluating your birds is to get a feel for their length, depth, width, and then their bone spacing, and then their meat to bone ratio as well, because that meat to bone ratio will really show you when you can expect results. So when you're evaluating the back, since that's the top of the bird and it's easier to get to right off the bat, you want to find where the wings tie into the body and figure out what that width is. So with how wide her skull is, that is carrying over to her back, and she's a good 3 fingers and some change in that width. And she did pick up a taper towards the back while maintaining width. That really helps fill out a shrink bag pretty well. It's all a matter of when. And you can kind of see here that taper where it's wider up here and it kind of tapers back. Lengthwise, you want to go from the base of the tail, which is right about there. You can kind of feel where the tail feathers are starting to come in. And then you want to take the palm of your hand, put that right at the base and run it up, and it should let your middle finger get right into that little shoulder V where the neck ties in. So length, she is spot on for that. Temperament-wise, she's not really crazy about this, but she's letting me do what I need to do. So another thing I check is wing integrity for all birds. But what I'll do here is this outer joint, that first joint away from the shoulder, I'll put my index finger under with my hand upright. I'll use my thumb to help spread out. And then I'll get a look at feather development right now. I think we're going to see some pin feathers because she's still in the middle of growing feathers. But that looks pretty okay for the age and current development. So next, I'm going to take her head and position it under my left arm to keep her calm. Get my left arm around her. Put her leg in here for stabilization purposes so that I can then tilt her up and have this hand available and the bird well in control. She can't escape, she can't get away, so I can evaluate her backside. So I'm looking for the 2 pin bones that are on either side of the vent. She's not even 2 fingers. 1 finger fits in between those bones. Really, at this age, I'm looking for 2. She's not there. The other distance I'm looking for is where the keel ends. I can feel the end of the keel right here, where that finger is into the fluff. Her pin bone's up here. 2 fingers. Just at 3, it's tight. So already I'm not crazy about her bone spacing, and what that impacts is how easily she can lay eggs and how easily I'm going to be able to process her sons. And as she stands, I'm not really interested in having sons from her to process. So that seals that deal right there. Now once you go from the top end of the bird to the back end of the bird, next you're going to go to the underside of the bird. And this is just how I do things. People develop their own methods as they go along. So right now I'm putting my left hand underneath and between her legs, and she is these 3 fingers wide in between the legs, and I like to see a lot more than that. As I feel down the keel, I'm not feeling a whole heck of a lot of meat there. And as far as the length of the keel, and you'll kind of feel where the keel begins and where it ends. Let me see if I can get that measurement and hold it true. From the end of this finger to here, if I squish my hand up a little there, it feels to me a little bit short compared to what I'm used to. And it's not very well fleshed, and that's going to become really apparent once we get the feathers off. So if I could show you an image of what it feels like, it's very steep like this, and there's not a whole lot of meat on the side of that keel. Now, technically, above this, coming from the back, is the rib cage, and I still kind of refer to it as spring to the ribs for the width, even though there aren't any ribs on the underside of the bird. I'm looking for more of a fuller, wider kind of feel. She doesn't have that. So next I'm going to grab the American breast pullet. We're going to see how she feels and how she measures out. And then we'll get to the visual where hopefully what I'm saying all ties in to what we're seeing. Alright, next up we have the purebred American breast pullet. Yeah, I know, you're chatty and cute. Doesn't change anything. Now in comparison for the head, this one has kind of a little peanut head. Not quite as wide, but she makes up for that later in the body. So she has that same little over 3 finger back width. That's pretty similar. When I go down, I find the base of the tail and I put my hand down and I run it up. Length is about the same. Now when I tuck her head and get to her backside, oh, I know, let me see. She's about the same there too. 2 fingers for the pelvic width of those pin bones, which isn't great. And then when I find the end of the keel, she is a full and a little extra on 3 fingers. So that's pretty good. Let's see your wing. I don't think we're going to see quite so many pin feathers on this one. I think she feathered in faster when I look at that wing. Now the biggest difference between these 2 pullets is what they feel like on the underside. My entire hand, all the way across, fits in between her legs. with a little bit extra space. So she is this pinky out to here wider than the hybrid pullet. There's a difference in fleshing, though her fleshing does kind of taper off before we get to the end of the keel. It's not as strong as I want to see, and it's not quite as broad across the front of the chest as I want to see. But she feels a bit better than the other one. Just not ideal. So both of these are going to make a pretty good meal, and we're going to talk more about what they look like when the feathers are off. And I do firmly believe in showing the birds kindness and full consideration all the way through to the end, and that helps me do right by them. So even though she's an okay bird right now, I also need to eat. So let's move on and see what these results are and what makes them similar and different from each other, and where this little breeding program is going to go from here. All right, I'm sorry for the sudden appearance of the birds in this condition, but this is the whole point of this video. So this one is the pure American Bresse, and this one is the hybrid pullet. Both from the same hatch, both the same age at 16 weeks old, and there's an 8-ounce difference in their weight. This one being the 8 ounces heavier at 4 pounds 14 ounces, and this one being 4 pounds 6 ounces. So now that we're in this stage of the game of getting to dinner, we're going to evaluate the underside of the bird, because that's where all the breast meat is. And as I was doing my little adventure into dual purpose, it was this part of the bird that I most often found to be lacking and required the most breeding effort to get on track of where we want them to be. So for propriety's sake, I did go ahead and tuck the head under the wing so we don't have to look at that part, because our main focus right here is the breast meat and the shape of the carcass and how they compare or how they're different to each other. So right off the bat, I did a dry plucking because it's just 2 birds, so there's no reason to set up the scald pot and the plucker and all those time-consuming setup pieces. And the hybrid was behind in feathering and has many more pin feathers. The pin feathers are the ones that have not yet emerged into being full feathers, and the plucker can also have a tricky time getting those out, and that is why most commercial birds are white, because they're not as visible as a red feather or a black feather. The white feathers hide a lot easier. Now, on the American Bresse, this right here is where the keel begins. This is where the keel ends. That's pretty long. So if I put this finger up and I run it all the way down, right there is where it ends. And then we'll do the same on this bird, into this finger right here. Big difference in length in terms of structure. It doesn't look like much, but once you get into this, these little discrepancies actually turn out to mean quite a bit. So the drumstick, different sizes. This one's a lot thinner. This one's thicker and heavier. The width between the legs, it's a little weird now because of the position that they're in. So this one, when the bird was standing in live, it was a full hand. On this one, from this angle and view, it's going to look about the same, but when the bird is standing up, that's where things get a little tighter. Now, the fleshing difference here, this is pretty thin by our standards. This is more typical of a laying type of bird. I've seen this look a lot, and it's why we no longer have a lot of the breeds that I've tried in the past, because a lot of them were like this, very slow to develop, very slow to flesh in, and not much there during those prime roaster harvest ages, because the way that you cook a bird does vary by age. this one's a lot meatier. So our 8-ounce difference in weight, it's in the breast meat, and it's in the thigh meat and the lower leg meat. That's where that difference is. In terms of meat to bone ratios, the bone is pretty similar. So it's the fleshing that is contributing to our difference in weight. Now keep in mind, this breeding is 50% of this kind of bird, and yet it is less of a result. And that so far is proving true in the other subsequent chicks. And I'm going to have to dive more into that as we go forward. Now, I am on a little bit of a time crunch and I have more processing to do, but I wanted to get to this most important part of this part of the bird before I advance further. I'm going to skin them out because there's more to it. With the American Bresse, they're a special kind of bird. There's a difference in skin texture and fat development, and the only way to check that fat development is to get underneath the skin and get a look of it. So the rest of this, I'm going to go ahead and skin them out and see how they compare there. And this is a very thin white skin. Now, because the Chantecler is a yellow-legged, yellow-skinned bird, I would expect to see some differences there. That's ever so slightly thicker, but not by much. But more importantly, I want to see the fat composition that's going on in here. But this one's definitely hiding that extra weight in the meat of the carcass. And this is where I find all this stuff fascinating, and this is why I pay attention to these traits, because there's so much variability from one bird to the next and one breed to the next. You have to find what you like, figure out what your breeding goals are, and try to find the balance within all of that. Just from this view, I don't think there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of fat. And part of that, for the American Bresse part of it, is genetic. And I know these guys have both received very good nutrition. They've been on the custom American Bresse blend formulated by Jeff Maddox at Fertrell and manufactured by Kraut Creek. So I know nutrition is not why these birds are not quite what we're looking for. This would be genetics. This skin did peel back a bit as I was plucking feathers. This did a little bit. But I was grabbing, handfuls for the sake of speed. The difference in feathering seems to be like 2 weeks, thereabouts, maybe a couple more. I'd have to dig into those details a little more as I go through this project and watching them grow. But let me go ahead and move on and see what's on the inside. Well, now it's even more apparent what's different now that I've skinned them out and processed them further. Goodness gracious. So this is not what I want to see, but it's a heck of a lot better than this, and you can see that difference in width between the American Bresse and the hybrid of the American Bresse and the Chantecler. So their fat composition is similar. This one is lacking. This one, it is what it is, but I did see a bit of a difference on the fat pad that's on the back of the bird. Now the fat pad tends to develop throughout this whole region here, and it can also be at the front of the bird. And the American Bresse, there's intramuscular fat in here, but it's not visible in the sense that beef marbling is visible. And I think using the term marbling is incorrect, because it implies you should see it. But it doesn't translate until you cook the bird and see the juices that result from the bird, and then of course the juicy result. Now, this is part of the fat pad that came off of this bird, and this one didn't even have it except for just like little bits. So this one, pretty close to what we're looking for, but it can be better. But the difference in structure, the difference in width, the difference in growth rate, That's pretty apparent here. While not ideal for our flock, that's still a nice chicken. And this one is still going to be a meal. Probably for about 2 people, but a meal regardless. So that bone spacing I was talking about earlier, I'm going to show that now because you have your pin bones. You can feel them. They're a little bit sharp and a little bit pointy right there. This is where the vent of the bird would be. Here's the other little pin bone there. And there's our end of the keel. And even here you can see fat striations, more so on the breast and a little bit here on the hybrid. So the reason that fingers are the measurement is because you always have your hands with you when you're evaluating birds. So once you process, it widens out quite a bit because there's no longer the connective tissue holding them together. So this bird is at 3 fingers in between those pin bones, and then when you switch and you go from the distance of the end of the keel to those pin bones, it's 3 fingers and a little change. Now on the hybrid, we're at an easy 2 fingers and a generous 3 and some change from the end of the keel up to those pin bones. Because this opening on the back side of the bird, this is where eggs come out, and it's where your hand goes in to process, and you don't want that to be tight and pinched up, because if it's tight and pinched up, the bird is going to have a harder time laying, and you're going to have a harder time processing. So really, males and females both are going to have slightly different measurements. On a mature male, I'd be looking for a minimum of 2 fingers, and on a mature female, an active lay, I'd be looking for 4 fingers. If she's not currently laying eggs, 3 fingers will do, because it's going to flex out as they get into laying productivity. So now that I have these birds in this condition, I'm going to go ahead and bag them up, and then I'm going to put them in the refrigerator for about 4 days to go ahead and go through the rigor process to get to where they have cooking tenderness, because I've already missed the window on cooking these fresh today, because you only have 20 minutes from when you dispatch a bird to when you need to be cooking that bird in order to have it same day. If you miss that 20-minute window, then go ahead and observe a 4-day rest period and then get to cooking. That way you have the ideal texture without that rigidity that they can have and a firmness to the texture that some people don't find that appealing. So next, we're going to get into the gizzards and the contents of the gizzards. And I've set both of them aside here so that we can see what's inside. And this is coming from the advice of Jeff Maddox from Furtrell to always be aware of what your birds are eating, how much grit they have, how they're digesting, to make sure that your management of your flock is where it needs to be. So I'm going to switch over to the overhead view. We're going to open these up, see what's in there, and see if maybe there's a reason they didn't gain the way we wanted them to. Because you never know. So you always have to look at all the angles and see if there's any improvements you can make in terms of how you manage your flock. Well, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't do the dress weight. And this is minus the feet, the head, the insides, and the wings, because when I skin out a bird, the wings kind of aren't worth it. So we went ahead and took that off. So let's see what the hybrid weighs for the dress weight. Get it on there balanced. So we're at 1 pound, 11.8 ounces. Kind of pathetic if you ask me. Now for the American Bresse, 2 pounds, 6 ounces. And for everything we took off, that's about right. I'll take that. That's a meal. All right, back to gizzards. So it just dawned on me while setting up for this that our dress weights had a 10-ounce difference, with the American Bresse being 10 ounces heavier after it was all said and done when we got everything off of there than the hybrid. And I'm going to go ahead and say that anytime you hybridize with the American Bresse, if you're using a slow growing bird to hybridize with, you're going to lose. You're not going to gain. So that was pretty interesting to see. Now, in terms of the gizzards, the one with more fat is from the American Bresse, and it's a little bit smaller than the one from the hybrid. So that's interesting to see. Now, up at the top of the gizzard, there's a little tube, and that's where the food goes from the crop into the gizzard. And so what I like to do is go ahead and split down the middle, aligning with that tube, to get inside and see what they've been eating and what's in there for grit. This looks fantastic. There's feed in various sizes, and there's grit in here, and that's what grinds the feed down to where they can digest it further and get the most out of what they're eating. So when you're preparing the gizzards, you want to empty the contents and give it a rinse, but I don't have my hose over here, so I'll just empty it like that. And see this yellow lining on the inside? You want to start peeling that away and getting that off of there, and that will give you a clean and cookable gizzard. Now, I personally don't eat these, but I have a couple of dogs that are going to be more than happy to have this, and I'll cook it up for them with the livers and the hearts. So on the hybrid gizzard, there's a little hole there, so I'll go ahead and lay that down, have it, open it up, see what's inside. That too looks really good. There's a good mix of grit, feed, and various stages of digestion. We'll pop all that out because I wasn't really planning on doing this today, so I didn't pull them off of feed. So it's still there. Plus, I'm not worried about human consumption for this particular bit. And then we'll go ahead and peel it. And we'll get into some pretty tasty dog snacks. I'll give the clean gizzards a little rinse, add it to my other parts and bits for the dogs. But that, pretty nice looking. And the contents tell us these were healthy and doing what they need to be doing. Since I haven't washed my hands out, let's go ahead and pick that up. Now, these darker bits here, the red bits, that's the granite grit that they've been taking in to help break everything down. And the feed that they were on was a milled feed, not a crumble, not a pellet. But when you get in here and you look, there's no kernels of corn. It's been ground down by the muscle of the gizzard and the grit they were taking in. This is exactly what I would hope to see. So always check your gizzards and make sure they're performing as they should and the birds are uptaking what they should, and make sure you're on the right track. So now that I'm all done, I saw what I needed to see. I know I have a lot of work to do on those hybrids to rein them in to where I want to see them, and I'm going to keep going with that because the F1, while they have vigor, they just don't quite have that little extra bit I'm looking for in the growth rate and the fleshing. So I'm going to go ahead and chase that on down through the generations and see if I can get what we're looking for the table traits into a winter hardier bird. But just know it's work, it's space, it's expense, and it's worth it if you come up with a good thing. So just make sure that you're paying attention to your birds, what they have to tell you when you handle them, if they have what suits your flock goals, and if they don't have it, eat them. Move on, hatch more, do better, eat the duds. Don't sell them on to be someone else's problem. Keep it in-house, because that is where your reputation comes from, and I've seen a lot of people ruin their reputation by selling their junky birds. Don't be that guy.